So I love seeing my code do something, effectively, like right away. So that's one thing that I sort of love. Okay, I don't know how much more to say than that. So I love like making a change and seeing it applied to the screen like instantly. So as we talk about this next project, let's talk about the DOM. We're going to be specifically giving you guys an opportunity to just like exhaust the subject of basically. So basically, the idea of the sprint is to learn as much as you can about the DOM in the couple of days, and learn as much as you can about HTML and CSS, and then how to apply JavaScript to that principle as well. So essentially, what you're going to be doing is building a little application, but it's really just cloning a website. Um, but the application meaning we're going to have like a specific file structure that we want you guys to follow, and this knowledge will carry into everything we do, for the next little while in the course, especially as we are working heavily with React over the next few weeks. Okay, so let's just take a little step back into the not so distant past and talk about kind of the landscape of JavaScript and web browsers in general. So if you just sort of Google the history of JavaScript, you can kind of figure this information out for yourself, and we'll have you guys sort of do that this sprint as well. There's definitely time built into this sprint for you guys to research as much as you can about this stuff. So one thing that I just want to kind of go over is sort of this idea that JavaScript is still young in computer science. Computer science in general has been going on for a really long time. But applying like programming languages beyond that of, machine level languages like assembly, that like Wozniak and Jobs were doing, in the early days of Apple, languages started just to like come out of the woodwork, right? And so it was Netscape that had, I believe it was Netscape, which is a browser that's obsolete today, right? And sort of came out of this like whirlwind of like best practices for what's going to happen with the DOM, okay, for what's going to happen with web browsers, okay? And so Netscape came out, and it was all of a sudden able to read this new language in the 90s, around 95-ish, called JavaScript, or JScript, I think it was called back then. And Java was a really popular programming language back then. And so because of that, Brendan Eich, who wrote the language, gave JavaScript the name JavaScript because it was just popular, even though the two languages have nothing to do with each other. Java is a server-side class object-oriented language, and it's compiled, and then JavaScript is a scripting language that is actually run at a higher abstraction than most other compiled languages. It's scripted, and it uses C++ under the hood to basically spit. Spit out what the computer can read as ones and zeros essentially. So just know that there is a major difference between Java and JavaScript. And you probably remember back in the day, and even in some browsers today, if you go and access a web page and it's like, you're missing this Java plugin. So everything was done in the world of web development with like Java plugins. So yeah, Steve Jobs probably wasn't programming. It was more of his, but he's the ideas man, right? You kind of need that to push it along. So I don't know his whole exact, I've never even actually seen his little Hollywood spiel. But anyway, so regardless of all this sort of like mudded history in this world of like building, applications that can exist on the World Wide Web and known as web pages, right? There kind of came this idea that needed to sort of be some sort of standard, and that's where the DOM came in. Okay, the DOM stands for Document Object Model. So you know that it's an object-oriented paradigm already, and it refers to documents. And so what do I mean by documents? So files that exist, somewhere. So when you create an app.js file or a, callback practice.js file, you're creating a document, right? And you're expecting something to be able to read that document and turn it into a web page. And so how we do that is primarily through using languages that your browser can interpret and read and then spit out to become this web page. So if you browse to any web page, you'll be able to sort of see the workings of the DOM underneath the hood. Okay, and what I mean by that is right here. I'm going to actually share my screen, and here we go. Okay, so let me show you what I mean by this. So if I navigate to, let's say, lambdaschool.com in my browser, okay, and I have like screen splitting right here, so you guys could probably just get as much room as we can. Okay, so eventually, you came across our little web page here that was built, but you can go ahead and just use either Command Shift J, Command Option J, or right click and click on Inspect in your Chrome browser. Now, if you want to do this in Safari, you have to actually enable the DevTools in Safari. And if you want to do this in Firefox, I believe it comes out of the box. For this course, we highly recommend Chrome for application development. It's not that we are getting paid by Google to say that, although it would be really nice. It's just that they have a very modern browser that reads, ECMAScript 6 and beyond. So if you pop open your inspect element, you go and inspect, right? You can see this cool DevTools that comes up. And essentially what you see right here is a document that is going to be the result of this, of what the DOM does. It takes HTML, it takes CSS as languages themselves, and it basically spits them out into this data structure. Now, this may be a little bit obvious, but just based on this structuring, what type of data structure do you think that this is? As we have these nested elements that are all nested in between, and then if we close the body, there's just two, sibling elements, and body has some children. What type of data structure is this? It's the big old tree. We'll just call it the big old tree. Yeah, HTML is hypertext markup language. That's the language that you're seeing right here. It's HTML. But this data structure is a tree structure. So when anyone ever refers to the DOM, they say, oh, the DOM tree, open up your DOM tree. That's what we're specifically referencing. Is you don't have to delete that, Patrick. Don't be afraid about your answer. Hypertext markup language is what HTML stands for. So I think it was a really good guess. So yes, the DOM reads a document. Okay, so that's why you see this little this self-closing tag up here. And it says doc type HTML. Okay, so when the browser takes this and it uses this paradigm of the document object model, and it says this is an HTML document. Okay, now what's cool is that in here in the head we have these links to a bunch of different icons that are specified, or that are specific icons that are going to be basically our favicons. So if you look at the top here, you have this little thing, this little animated piece up here in the tag, in the tab, I mean. So if I go to google.com, they're going to have a favicon as well. See how it took a second to load that? If you refresh the page, it has to look for that. So what these link tags are doing are pointing to specific sizes of favicons that are, basically specific to the browser that are using them. So like this is pretty heavy stuff, so you don't need to worry too much about this. But yeah, this is a very common pattern you'll see. You can go into any website and look at their optimized, well, it's going to be there's going to be a lot more garbage here dumped inside of what do you call it? the Googs, right? So there's a bunch of stuff inside this head tag, all right? So, all right, this may be pretty basic for a lot of you, and you may be like, thinking, like, are we really doing this sprint on this DOM stuff? But just know that if you are, expected to, just know that you're expected to know this stuff, right? If you go into a job interview, and maybe you're just, looking for a back-end development job, but it's sort of like implied that even if you're working in back-end development, that you understand at least the basic principles of HTML, CSS, and how to interact with those things. If you're going into it, going into the job search, and you're primarily looking for like front-end jobs, you're going to need to know a lot more about these things and how they interact. But I'm just showing you right now what happens after the DOM takes your document and then looks at it under the hood and then spits it out, and uses that document to produce what we call web pages, right? So it's actually pretty awesome. And there are, if you think of your check matching leaves algorithm that you guys wrote, there are algorithms that are pretty similar to that allow us to basically traverse this tree and either delete or insert or update or append or prepend nodes. Each one of these things is called a node, right? So if we open this body, this div is a node right here that contains a bunch of child nodes, right? So it's got a nav, that's a style, it's got a nav tag, and then it's got a bunch of divs and then a bunch of anchor tags that represent our little navigation bar up here, okay? So every single one of these things is a node, and there are just massively, extremely optimized algorithms that exist in browsers for you to be able to access with some JavaScript methods that can traverse this DOM tree and update these nodes. So whether that is, like I said, remove, update, delete, add, so you can basically use all this, this knowledge that you just did with all this tree, this data structure sprint, all this tree stuff to sort of reflect back and think, oh man, whoever is writing, whoever's over at Google writing stuff for Google Chrome, they have some amazing algorithms that go and basically utilize this V8 engine, and it's so optimized, and they go in, under the hood, they can just go super fast and take stuff in and out of the document. Now, I did see that Ryan commented and said jQuery. Yes, that's a library built in JavaScript. So jQuery is just JavaScript under the hood. It has a whole mess of what they call methods, right? It's just a bunch of methods that you can use for DOM manipulation, for traversing the DOM tree, for telling JavaScript to traverse a DOM tree, find a node, and do something with that node. Whether that be, finding it by class, or finding it by ID, or finding it by its actual name and updating it. So there's so much to learn about, these optimized algorithms. And there's some really, really cool stuff out there like React today that actually has taken that paradigm, and instead of just doing it right here in the DOM itself, because since these algorithms are so heavily optimized, but if you utilize them, say you're going to update a list like a table in your web page with 1,000 elements, and then when you hit the next page in that table, it paginates the next 1,000. Now that's going to be really, really costly. Once again, I think Ben mentioned to you guys in your sprint that every data structure comes with a cost associated with it. And so everything is a trade-off in computer science. And the tree traversal is one of those things that, you could write an entire master's thesis or a doctoral dissertation on, because there's so many things yet to explore with it in order to optimize it. But we're in a pretty good place today. But what React has done is taken the heavy lifting of DOM manipulation out of the browser, and it does it in what they call their own virtual DOM. And then so it can take your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript from a single file, and then the JavaScript sort of looks like, we call it JSX. It looks like HTML when you render out like these little components. It'll render that, and it'll say it needs to go into this place in the DOM, and then it'll inject it right there. Okay, and then you have this application that you can build these very small modular pieces of code called components. We're going to touch a lot more on that, and you guys are going to get a ton of time to work with React. And so I want to focus on doing this without jQuery, doing this without React, doing this without the ways that are more modern today. We're gonna teach you guys from the ground up with this sprint. So yes, that's one thing that's really, really cool about the DOM is it takes once again it can read languages like HTML and CSS, and it can basically interpret those in some sort of object-oriented way. So If you open up your dev tools, you will see sort of a section here. You have your JavaScript console, so you can write inline JavaScript here. So you've seen us do this already, you know, bar, whatever, and then you can write inline JavaScript right there in your console. But I want us to focus for this sprint primarily on the elements page, because that's what you're going to be working as. In the DOM, we call these nodes, we call them elements, okay? So there's block level elements, and then there's inline level elements as well. And so, and then there's like other types of elements that we'll get to. Elements have attributes on them, and these attributes get assigned some sort of like value pair mapping. So this div, we know it as the class nav container. So if I wanted to actually select this div, I could come over here, I could hold on to that div, and I could say that div, that's how we're going to select it. So this is now over here on the right-hand side of my screen. You see this styles section, and you see like computed, event listener, DOM breakpoints, and properties. So we're going to be primarily concerned with this sprint with styles, okay? So computed is pretty cool because you can look and see what type of styling is computed. And so if I go and I select this nav container now, and I wanted to update this inline, I could say background, and I could just apply some sort of CSS. Now it's probably not going to take on that property because it's going to be overridden, or no, you just can't see it. So let's get an element that we can actually see that's not like just a wrapper element. So let's say this, well, first off, yeah, let's just say our first node in this unordered list, which is going to be this first list item, okay? List item is, yeah, so that's our drop-down menu right there. So pretty cool. You're going to have to recreate this. It's going to be sweet. And then, but let's do the blog, okay? So let's select this item, and you can see that it has, you know, specific classes, and you can share classes amongst nodes. So that way you can use styles for just one thing. So background color, we're going to say, and we're actually going to say this. And this is, once again, this is now called CSS. So over here, we're in the HTML. Over here on the right, we're in CSS. So got rid of that. So we can go and we can actually just see like all the different colors. And you can see at the top of my screen. Can you guys see the top of my screen up here on the top? Okay. So you can see
computer science education.
Sorry, what was that?
Where it says the computer science education. Like,
yeah, and then the very top where it says the navigation bar says courses, blog, contact, apply. Okay, so you can see that I'm changing the colors by selecting, you know, by simply selecting this class and applying a new color to it. So that's how HTML, you know, works. You basically, you can assign this node, this element, a list element, a class, and you can select it by, this one they're selecting the actual, all the list elements, and then saying all list elements that have the class VPF. And I know it's selecting class because it's saying .vpf. So I could select it in both ways. You know, I could be more specific and say anything, because maybe I have VPF redefined later. So I'm just saying specific to all list elements where VPF is the class, you know, assign the background color to this ugly sky blue. Well, maybe to some people that's not ugly, so that's not fair. But if we, you know, there's a bunch of stuff you can look in the Chrome browser that you can just go and, you know, read the actual strings in colors that your Chrome browser already knows that, you know, you can just define them in there. Cornflower blue must be one. So let's see what that looks like. Cornflower blue. Wow. Never even heard of cornflower before. That must be like a polenta, like, is that cornflower? Polenta, whatever. Anyway. All right, so you can go about looking at like these things that exist in this DOM tree inside of this web page, and just by right-clicking that single element, it's going to take you to where that element's defined. So you can see we have, you know, this div. Let's say we want everything inside this div to be a different color or a different background or whatever. You can go and select it and do it inline by hitting that little plus value, and it's going to give you the ability to edit styles inline. But once you refresh the page, the styles are going to be gone. So just know that as you go and you update styles through this sprint, that you're going to be, you know, refreshing stuff and testing it in the browser, and that's fine. but just know that as you get further and further along your edits, that you're going to need to actually save them somewhere, because if you refresh, you're not going to be able to go back. It's going to be wiped. Okay, so that's sort of a very high-level crash course on this stuff. So let's go into making this work for you guys from scratch. Okay, so if you were to build a web page today, you would start with some sort of HTML file. And when we call this index.html, it's usually sort of what you see. It's usually what you see as like your main HTML file. So you can consider this your main HTML file. So let me make sure I'm opening this folder. Okay, because that's what I wanted. So now if you want to add a style sheet to this, you just call it style.css or styles. So because we're going to have multiple styles in here, I'm going to be more robust with it, or more verbose, I mean. And then let's say we have some sort of JavaScript in here. So we're going to call this our app.js file. Okay, so this is going to be your web page. You're sort of building out this application, this little website. It's going to be a static site that you're going to build. And then to start, one thing that you can do, if you're on a Mac, now this command may be very similar for anyone using Windows or Linux or another machine, but on Mac, it's built in that you have Python under the hood. You can go python-m and say simple HTTP server, and you can start that. And it's got to be, you know, kind of camel case like this, or this is, can't remember the name of this casing. But anyway, since it's a capital at the first, it's got a special name for the casing. And it says capital simple, and then all caps HTTP, and then capital server. Okay, you run that, and it's going to say, okay, server is listening on port 8080. Okay, so this is an HTTP, so hypertext transfer protocol, is I believe what that stands for. That's going to be pointing to an address on your local machine. All right, so I can go and I can say localhost 8000. And I can hit this page, and right now there's nothing on it because it's just a white screen. Okay, so that's good. We've hit it. Now I can inspect it and see what we're lacking. And you can see out of the gate, by default, my HTTP protocol, because this is the protocol by which everything happens through the web right now. This is the main standard protocol, is HTTP. So HTTP will read this even though I haven't specified anything in this index.html file. And it'll say that is going to be an HTML document. You can see it'll inject a head and a body for me. Now it's got some user agent style sheet styles that come out of the box that we'll talk about in just a minute. Okay. And yes, brackets is very good for this, and so is CodePen. So this brackets does this under the hood when you press like view my files. So if you're into the brackets editor, I recommend, you know, maybe using that for you if you want. Or CodePen has, you know, some nifty tools set up, and you can do this with like JS Fiddle as well, or even JS Ben supports HTML and style documents. So you can go and use any of these apps online. For this project, you're going to be submitting a project of these files. So we recommend getting used to doing this by yourself and like building a server under the hood. Or if you want, you can even just take this index.html file and simply drag it over into Chrome. And you can see it'll open a blank file pointing to that index.html document. So you can do this multiple ways, but I like to build a server so that way when I save and I just come over here and refresh, it's, you know, it's just kind of a simple, I can use a simple pointer to it. And then it says, how do you save the edits if you're in the browser? So you can copy and paste when you make edits in the browser. So if I was going to say all body, you know, if I was going to select the body and say background color blue, it's going to change that background color. I would select this, and I'd actually want to just paste that into my style sheet, you know, when I get to that point. So when I start learning, I'm going to teach you guys how to do all this in just a second. So, all right, so the first thing we need as a document that we're going to be reading, because this is the file that your app is going to read every time first, is the index.html file. So you need to specify that it's doc type. Doc type, HTML. As simple as that. Okay, and you use this important tag at the front of it to sort of, you know, specify that you're reading a special type of element tag. Okay, So now if I save and I go back to my local host, you'll see that we have now this doc type tag, and it's like, okay, now I know what to do with this doc type. And there's a bunch of default stuff that comes out of this that I won't go into at this moment, okay? So now it's like, okay, so we have this page, there's really nothing on it, so we're gonna give them a default HTML and body and head tag. So let's actually just do that real quick. So HTML, okay, that's gonna be everything in your app exists in between these HTML brackets. And then there's two siblings here. There's a head sibling and a body sibling. They're both children of our HTML document. So now head is going to be more concerned with anything that has to do with, I don't want to comment that out. I just want to, well, I'm going to do this. So head has to do with anything. So comments in HTML are different than in JavaScript. It's no longer the / to comment stuff out. You have to use this important tag. So remember, anything of importance, right? The document will read this tag with this important flag, this bang, and it'll say important, and then ignore anything in between these two dashes. Well, in between these 4 dashes. So, in here, we're going to say, okay, so the head is basically where our data exists that doesn't get displayed to the user. So what I mean by that is mostly this is where your metadata exists. So if you need your document to point to specific files, like we're going to show you in just a second, I'll show you right now. This is where you'd put your link tag. Your link is going to point to a specific file. So in this app, I have a file called styles.css, and not CSS, because that's not a thing. CSS stands for cascading style sheets, okay? And then we also want to link it to our, well, we're going to do that with the script tag, never mind. Okay, so in our head, we want to be pointing to files that we need reference to, especially when it comes to styles. So now our HTML document is looking for a place inside the root of this directory, because we're not specifying otherwise, called styles.css. Now anything we write in here can be pulled in from that styles.css file and referenced, okay? So now if I save this, I should see that, and I refresh the page over here, that I have a link pointing to a style sheet, and then I have this commented out place and this empty body tag. And then if you look at our sources now, you can see what localhost is reading at 8,000, and it's going to say we've got an index page and we have a style sheet. Okay, so sources is very important as well to make sure that all your stuff is linked up. Okay, so it'll be easy to go through. Okay, somehow make my code bigger. Yes, sorry about that. We'll do that. That's probably a little bit better. All right. And then Julian just asked for this sprint if we're going to be using Bootstrap. For this sprint, no. Bootstrap is a styles library that is built, which is funny because a lot of the styles that are on our website ourselves are using Bootstrap. So try and do everything you can without using Bootstrap to get so much more out of it, okay? Yes, and we're not building an API right now to answer this. And it says, I'm not sure. Yeah, we will be building APIs in the future. Yes, and you can link them like Google Fonts API. Yes, so this is where inside the head tag, this is where you would link any specific fonts you want that don't exist to styles already. So you can link them in there, or you can link them in your style sheet as well. So there's 2 different ways to sort of pull in fonts, and you can research how those work. And then, okay, so HTML equals structure, CSS equals style, JavaScript equals dynamics and interaction functionality. Yes, thank you, Ryan. That is exactly right. So when we're looking at these things, just think of your HTML as your layout, or basically the architecture of a building, okay? But the architecture is no good without like any walls or paint or anything inside of that, and that's gonna be your styles, okay? So now once you go and paint the walls and make it look pretty and actually add like tables and countertops, and you're going to be using CSS to like position elements all around. So in picture, CSS is sort of like an interior decorator or designer coming in and like basically taking that blueprint and architecture that's already been built and like going around and making things fit nicely or in the place. And then JavaScript would be like the electricity in the house. I think Ben uses this very example. So I think Ben is the person I got this from. So JavaScript would be like, okay, so I want to turn on my coffee maker in the morning. So I'm going to go over to my coffee maker and click it. And then all of a sudden, it's going to click a button and make it work. It's going to actually work. So the same way with this web page that we have pulled up. So we have, a layout. So our, basically the elements that exist in the page in some sort of DOM tree, and then styles position the elements around. And when a user comes and clicks on it, JavaScript does something, takes you to certain places or whatever. So now if we go back to the beginning though, there's some cool stuff that you can do nowadays in CSS, because the third version of CSS language is out called CSS3. Imagine that, and there's a bunch of cool stuff that are inside of it. You could do animations right in your CSS now. So like the rule for the sprint will be if you can do it in CSS, try and get it to work in CSS, and then apply JavaScript later. So if you need something to drop down, probably a good drop down, a good thing you guys go through is trying to make this drop down just like transition with some CSS. But then when you click on something, maybe have that be JavaScript. Okay. So, okay. In case you haven't gotten by now, the idea of this sprint is to push you guys to build as far as you can in 2 days to build a clone of our website, using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And then if you're able to get to a really, really good place, the extra credit is to then go back and update your JavaScript to use jQuery. So you can see kind of how in the not so recent past or not so distant past, people were building web applications without things like React and Angular and Backbone and things that exist out there today. So jQuery was a library that came out in the later 90s that basically blew everything out of the water as far as web development goes, because it gave us DOM manipulation tools that were so cool. But you're going to be using just plain HTML and CSS and JavaScript for this sprint until you get to the extra credit portion. Then you're going to be able to go and use jQuery. So, and then Julian posted this link saying W3 Schools is a good point of reference. That is true. They are sort of W3C is sort of the governing, so to speak, body saying these should be best practices for these things. So in HTML and CSS, there's tons of best practices, tons of opinions out there of how things should be done. But these guys are a large group organization that are centered around making standards for the world. I recommend them. I recommend CodePen itself. I recommend CSS Tricks. I recommend there's a bunch that I've given you in the homework that are going to let you go for it. I recommend MDN still because that's more JavaScript, but MDN has HTML, CSS as well. So these are all references. So MDN is a Mozilla Developers Network. They're sort of more or less competitors to W3C, but they're more focused on like what should go in the Firefox browser. And like what should be best practices. And so the thing is like these things are, the cool thing about the web is that things are so dynamic, they're constantly changing. So yeah, another piece of this is to understand a principle in CSS called the document object model. Sorry, that's dumb. Called the box model, okay? So this box model is basically, you can go and you can look at any element. And if I were just to inspect this element, I'm going to see its box model principles that are revolving around that. So this box model has this idea of margins, okay? This idea of borders, okay, padding, and then content, okay? So that's your box model that the browser reads, okay, or that CSS sort of interprets, okay? So if I go and I create an element, so let's actually get cracking on this. Let's create an element inside a div tag inside this body. So we're going to div tags divider tag. Okay, so and I'm going to say that this element has let's just do this for now. So class equals wrapper div. Okay, and it's up to you how you want to define your class names. They can go, hyphen, underscore, or camel case, or kebab case, or snake case, or whatever you want. I recommend using, I think this is just called kebab case, or kebab case, like a shish kebab. So I recommend that style, just because I think it reads nicely, but you can do whatever you want. So if you use, just pick a standard and go with it. If you do camel case to name your divs, and you're going to name these whatever you want. So wrapper div's a terrible name. There's this idea that your markup name should be semantic. Semantic markup is basically saying describe what this thing is, and that's what you're going to name your classes or your IDs. Okay. So in order to select this, I'm going to have a class. I can have an ID on it too. So ID equals div1, which is not semantic at all. It's terrible. But yeah, you go ahead and research what semantic markup means, and notice that I'm not doing that right now. So now if I go into our style sheet and I want to select that specific div, first off, I need to make sure our body and our HTML document have, this is just standard practice. So I'm going to select the body, and I'm going to select the HTML elements. These are block level elements that are not classes, so you don't select them with any selector. What I mean by selector is either a hash or a period, okay? And then you go and you basically say HTML and body get 0 margins. So margin is 0, okay? And there'll be height and width of 100%. And what I'm doing by this is just simply resetting the HTML and body tags so that they're just like the whole entire canvas. Our big wrapper gives us the whole entire canvas of the screen to deal with, okay? So height and width of 100%, and then now let's say we have our wrapper div, okay? Now I open and close this. This is how you write CSS. It kind of looks like a JavaScript object, right? Because you have your key value pairs. That's essentially what you're doing, but instead of commas, you use semicolons, okay? So our wrapper div is going to take a background color. Sorry, I've been working in inline CSS for a couple of years, which is what I do a lot of in JavaScript or in React in development. So a lot of JavaScript to use, like basically interpret and read and spit out my CSS code, which is a heated topic in today's React landscape. So I'm going to say a background color of salmon, okay? And I'm going to say height gets maybe 700 pixels. It's huge. And then our width will get another 500 pixels. So it's just going to be thinner. It's going to be a rectangle. By the way, everything in your browser is a rectangle. Pixel is just a rectangle that represents an X and a Y value. Okay? A height and width. Oh, it's not hard. It's not too hard to pick up. The thing is with me, so Jesh asked how hard is it to pick up HTML and CSS as he's brand new to it. I feel like I'm brand new to it all the time. All right, so it's something that I'm learning every single day as I go. All right, so as we continue to go through this, let's say our background is going to actually be color. I'm going to specify this, and I'm going to say yellow. Yellow-green, a little bit more vibrant. And you can notice that I have a really cool text editor with VS Code. A bunch of stuff comes out of underneath the hood. I don't have any plugins for HTML and CSS. A very common plugin for front-end developers is called Emmet, which allows you to like really fast, like quickly craft your code. I just am using VS Code and I'm writing these things, and it's giving me syntax highlighting because it recognizes the CSS file. Cool. Did we have a question? No? Okay. All right, so I'm going to reload this page now and see where we're at. So you can see I have this background. It's not very useful. All I have is this CSS. I have this body tag that I'm selecting, an HTML tag, and giving them a height and width of 100 and a margin of 0, and then a background color of yellow-green. But then I have this wrapper div that gives me a background color of salmon and then a fixed height and width. So if I go and I look at this now, I can basically take a look and see right there in line, I can see my element. And I can basically say that element, I can look at its styles right here on the right, and I can say, okay, I have this div tag that has a class wrapper div, and wrapper div has these properties. And I can go and adjust these things on the fly. So maybe we don't like the height of this. Oh, that's the width, I'm sorry. If you hold down shift and go up and down there, it's like a really fast way to bring it up by 10 pixels each time. If you just go one click at a time, and I'm just simply pressing up and down on the keys. So yeah, maybe I actually do like this. I want this to be square. So I'm going to go 500 by 500 pixels. Okay. Okay. So now if I refresh the page, it should have saved that change. It's a square. It's 500 by 500 pixels. So now inside of here, anything I nest inside this div is going to become inside this container here. Our wrapper div is going to get some sort of nested element. And let's say I'm going to put in like an H1 tag, which is a header tag, right? And I can start typing it and then autocomplete by pressing tab. One thing I also like about modern text editors, like Sublime and Atom, is they let you do that. And then as well as like VS Code and others. So now in here I can just say inside this div. Okay, so now you're going to see an H1 tag. If I come over here and refresh the page, you're going to see it inside this div. But notice that automatically doing that, I've pushed my element away. Let's figure out what happened real quick. So you can see that out of the box, our H1 tag gets this user agent style sheet, and it's adding some font size to it. It's adding some font weight, and it's just marking as display block, which is fine. But what's happening is that's reacting inside my div in a certain way. So you can go and figure out ways to essentially control that so that doesn't happen. So in here, I could just override the user agent style sheet by selecting the H1 tag and sort of resetting it and say margin 0, right? Padding 0, okay? And so that way it should take away those styles that came with the user agent style sheet. Now you can see that I overrode whatever's getting, happening here so that I have no margins that are pushing me away from the page. Now, when I look at this, if I were actually to add some padding to it and say maybe 10 pixels, that's going to put, this is shorthand for saying apply padding to the left, to the top, right, left, or top, right, bottom, and left of the element itself. So our H1 tag now gets some padding. And you're going to see what padding does is it works as sort of like a way to push the elements away from the inside of each other. So when you use padding, you're trying to push elements away. So if I go and I refresh the page, you saw that it shifted. If I did this drastically, you saw that it shifted down and then to the right a little bit. And then as it does that, that's adding the padding. So let's go and look and see what happens. It got 100, 100, 100, and 100 around the size in the box model here. So pay attention to your box model to see kind of what's going on there. So now I kind of want everything to be center aligned. So I can say align, let's say, not justify, but align content. Is it align content center? So now it's going to take the content and just put it to the center of alignment of the, did I save? So it might just be, it might be something else. You're gonna have to go and play around with this. I mean, one way to align things like right away is to say, I want 0 margins, top and bottom, but I want auto, and that's on left and right. And you see as I refresh the page, sorry, save and refresh, you're gonna see that it's gonna apply now. Well, we're not getting them. It's saying auto, but it's not actually adding anything to the margin because it was already doing that. So I'll have you guys for sure go around and play with this. So just remember, the margin pushes elements away from their outer elements. So this wrapper div, if I were to give this a margin of like 2, sorry, once again, that's habit from JavaScript. So if I say 2 rem, that's 2 relative, relative places on the top, bottom, left, and right. So if I select this div, I now have a margin outside of this. It's basically equating to 32 pixels on the top, right, bottom, and left. So if you want to use shorthand, maybe you just want this on the top and bottom, but you want 0.5 REMs. so relative, pixels. If you wanted 0.5 REMs on the right and left, you would put a second property on this spot here. So now if I save that, you can see that it's only adding 8 pixels as opposed to 32 to the top and bottom. So the differences between margin and padding is that padding affects the elements inside, or the content inside of an element. So think of the padding like basically like the matting on like a frame. If you've ever framed a picture, you have like matting in there. It pushes the content of that frame inside of the element. And then margins push elements away from one another. So if I had more of these wrapper divs, sorry, I'm gonna do it right here. If I just created multiple of these wrapper divs and I, so now they're all block level elements, so they go to the next line, right? So, but if I want to now display these, left to right, in fact, I'm going to change the pixels to 200 so you can visualize this a little bit more. And I want this to be displayed in line. So in line gives me the ability to take a block level element and move it in line. And this is giving me a hint. Oh, maybe I need to say inline block for this. That's better. So now, and then you can see that we have this H1 tag. We're going to actually change this to be just everything gets a paragraph tag instead, because we just want to use some content there. And then we're going to apply these styles to paragraph instead of H1. And then we're going to say, excuse me. We're going to say all paragraphs get the font size of 20 pixels. Let's move that up to like 26. I hate this right now. And I'm just going to say, I hate just how this is laid out. I'm going to make this simpler for my eyes, I'm going to say 1, 2, and 3. And I'm going to say blue, salmon, and yellow. Actually, yellow would be terrible on this. Let's go black. Okay. So now these are second classes that I've added to this. So everything that says wrapper div.blue. So now if I go and I refresh the page, you can see that I can come in here and it's going to give me a shortcut. So now if I want to select this, I can just hit add value and it's going to say, okay, anything that's div at div1. In fact, I should probably change. So all of your IDs should be unique. So that's a rule of thumb. IDs in your markup, in your HTML should all be unique. Okay. So I had multiple IDs, so if I wanted to pseudo select or select further, so it's going to say, okay, you can select it that way by selecting the actual ID, and that's a fine way to do it, but I wanted to save the IDs for more of JavaScript practice. So if I go in here, you can see now I have ID2, div ID3, and then if I want to select this one, you can see that, it'll give you a shortcut of how to select that individual one, and we can do it this way, that's fine. What I was going to try and do is do a secondary selector on the class. So you can say something like dot wrapper div space blue space dot blue is my guess. And then you can say background color, thank you, text editor, blue. And then if I refresh this, so it's not actually selecting that, so I'd have to figure out my syntax here. It's probably just something like this. So, but if I come here and select it this way, where I select, maybe it's comma. There we go. So now everything's blue, which is not good because we wanted that to be specific. So let's do this. Let's get the specific one and let's recreate these elements. So div1 gets, what did we call it? Blue, okay. Let's delete this. So it's a pretty sloppy, like contrived way to go about this. And then salmon. And then this last one we said was going to get black, right? Okay. So now we can go And you can see that we have 3 different elements that we're selecting in 3 different ways. One is selecting all divs that have the ID div1, and then one is selecting all divs that have the ID div2, all divs that have the div ID. This should be, yeah, it got inherited, so that should be better. There we go. So now it's switched. Okay, I had that wrong. And then we'll say all divs get color white. So div get color, that's the text color, white. Okay, or you can go the common, pound FFF gives you color white as well. So this is kind of how you're going to be selecting elements and overriding them and make them look between different things. So now back to the original question: what's the difference between margin and padding? So if I select this second div element, which is this salmon colored one with the white div 2 in the middle, if I select this way, I can now say margin. Maybe I want this one to have a little bit different margins. And I say something like, actually, I don't want any margin on top, but I want to apply maybe 4 REM on the right and left. So now, margin. Thanks. If I didn't have a text editor, so you can see the margins in between div 2 and div 1 and then div 2 and div 3 have now been pushed away a little bit more, okay? So that's what margins do. They push elements away from one another. So if I said something on this blue one like margin left, margin left equals 10 REM, it's going to apply a left margin to this blue div, and it's going to push it all the way across the screen because it's pushing it away from the body tag in this case. So if I refresh it, it's going to push it all the way over. Sort of formatting our stuff this way is a very common way to sort of push elements away from each other. Margins are really, really finicky. So playing around with them and getting used to laying out objects or elements on the screen will be great. So, and then padding will push the elements from within, sort of give it that matting like you'd see on a picture frame. It gives it that inner padding, so it pushes elements inside the element. And then a border is simply a border that it's applied around the outside of the element. So if now I say all divs get a border of 1 pixel, this is shorthand right here. So border, and this is going to turn into something I'll show you in the DOM. 1 pixel solid is a property we can put on border. And we're going to say solid, FFF to be white as well. So now if I go in and refresh, you're going to see that border got applied to all of those elements, and it looks pretty terrible. So I'm going to do 3 pixels so you can see what that looks like a little bit better in the screen. So now border is simply just the outside edge of the element. Margin is the stuff. Let me annotate this because that's going to be really helpful, I think. So margin is the stuff that gets, pardon me, annotate. Cool. So margin gets applied outwardly. That's margin. Border gets applied to the outside. So this would be the border. Padding gets affected inwardly, like this, okay? Padding. And then your content is that last little piece, and that's going to be the middle section of it all. So if you look down once again at this box model, you have margins that are outside the element, and the border wraps around the edge of the element, and then padding is stuff that is affecting inside this element. And then your content is simply right there in the middle, okay? So that's your box model. That's kind of how it works. Now, to get to this point of what's happening with shorthands, you can see that I did 0 and 4 REM. That's going to go and apply margin top of 0, right, 4, bottom. That's sort of how you apply that. If I wanted to do a different one for each of these, I could go 1 REM for the top, space, 2 REM for the right, okay? Let's do, 1 REM for the bottom. And then if I wanted to apply the last one, it'd be like 9 REM for the left, or yeah, for the left side, and that's exactly what it's going to get you. So you can basically look at this. That's the shorthand for that. And then I did another shorthand with the border. So look at the border of my div, and I can do shorthand here. Now, if I wanted to select this stuff with JavaScript, let's see how that's going to work. Let's see, is that going to give me my text editor back? No, because it's full screen. Give me a second. I don't want to let the subject doesn't need to run on as much as, you know, a ton, but we're already going to go over, so I'm going to just let you look at how to link up your JavaScript. So, you know, some things you can do, you can wrap your functions, you know, and if you're using Chrome, you're probably going to be able to use ES6 in here. I would try it out. If you're not able to, just go back to the stuff you know in ES5 already. So I know you're going to be like, oh man, we just got done learning all these cool things with ES6. Why are you doing this to us? But I promise it's going to be beneficial to you in the end. So now one thing that's cool about this is, oh, I have a syntax error because I need a parenthesis right there. Okay, so I have this anonymous function that I can wrap all of my JavaScript in that's going to load on the page load. So if I go here inside the body tag, and before the closing body tag, you can add this script tag that points to this app.js file. Okay, so if I come in here now and I say console.log, actually I'm not going to do it in an immediately invoking function first. We're going to see if on page it just calls this function right away. So if I come in here and I say console, I don't want console, I want to console log something. So console.log, I'm linked. Oh, I am linked, so I don't want to do the /n stuff. Okay, so it's not actually running this function. It's not running this function body. But if I go and I immediately invoke it on page load, you should see it in the browser. So now I have JavaScript all the way inside of here. So I can go and I can basically say, hey, JavaScript, find div tag 1 and do something with it. So I can come in here and I can say, hey, document, that's calling the document that's linked up. Sorry, let me get rid of this. Document.get element by ID. It's calling the document, so it's calling this source index.js, right? There's this index file, I mean. Okay, it's calling this document and saying anywhere on that page, find an element by ID called, and I want to select, and since it's an element by ID, I'm using the hash selector instead of the dot selector. But I'm going to say, or sorry, that's what I'm going to refer to in CSS. I'm sorry. I come in here and I want to say div1. So find div1 and dot inner HTML. So that's a property right there. Say hello world. Okay. Now I'm going to come in here. I'm going to delete this p tag, and you can see that if I got everything just right, which I didn't, I need to make sure it's all hooked up. Oh. Inner HTML is not a function. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not a function. So I'm used to, so yeah, if I'm struggling with it. So it's not a function, you just set the inner HTML of that thing, that should work. You can look. So JavaScript is now injecting into the inner HTML of div ID or div1 ID, the ID of hello world. And this is JavaScript, so you gotta be best practices as much as you can. Well, best practices for, let's pretend we went back to 1994, 95, but you have like way cool stuff. Yes, there's an eyedropper tool in Chrome. I like to use ColorZilla, or that's actually a Chrome extension. But yes, you can use. So there's so many tips and tools. It looks like there's a lot of you who are super familiar with this stuff already, and that's great. You're going to be able to help each other out with this, and then maybe partner up if you're not familiar with this stuff. Get an idea of somebody who is, and partner up with the person who may be a little bit stronger. So somebody already called Ryan, it looks like. So that, hopefully it was Jesh, because nope, sorry, Jesh, you can't get on the Ryan board. But it looks like there's a few of you who are going to be able to sort of help each other out with this. But then when you get to the JavaScript for like selecting an element and things like that, use JavaScript for like some of the drop-down menus, but if you can do it in CSS, do it in CSS, but like linking and things may be more fun in JavaScript. So basically, we're going to ask you guys, for this assignment, you're going to be cloning our Lambda School website, just this first page. Don't worry about nested pages and linking to them. If you want, sort of select some sort of on-click handler. or whatever for these anchor tags, and let JavaScript like display a message in the console so that you know that you're clicked. But these are buttons, and you're going to want to like be able, well, they're navigation linked. You're going to be able to click on those. So you're going to go in and you're going to sort of try and figure out how to lay this stuff out with, you know, some of the animations. You see how I hover here, and there's a hover effect. You know, if I did a hover effect on these elements and said div, and then I said div pseudo select hover, now, you know, there's pseudo selectors that are going to select the element and give it, you know, when the cursor comes over, say cursor, I like the timer, or so what is it, transition? Okay, oh wow, not that. So cursor, I want to see cursor properties, come on. How do I get the beach ball? Cursor, let's say pointer would be the, you know, the little finger pointer. And then let's say that background changes to, and let's just say RGBA is like 0, 0, 0, that's black, 0.125. So it just basically changes it to like a faded color, really, really lame right there. But now as I come, I can hover over these elements. Oh, I might need to say, oh, let's see. Do I need an important tag on this? Oh, I know what I need to do. I need to define this afterwards because it's going to, CSS will inherit things, you know, based on the order in which you define it. So I actually probably don't need this now, but let's see. So yeah, let's put an important on there. So this is the most level of specificity I can get, and let's say color, so that way it knows. So now you can see, like, as I hover over these elements, each one does its own thing, you know. So that hover, there's dot focus. So if it's like an input field and it hits the focus, there's dot active. So if it's a link tag, so if it's li tag and link, whatever. Okay. So those are very commonly used items, you know, pseudo selectors. So I highly recommend you looking at, you know, pseudo selecting elements. You can do things like nth child. So now CSS can read the child elements. So CSS is getting better and better and more like designated like programming concepts. You know, select this element and, you know, move on and do something with it. So this is basically saying, you know, select whatever child you specify in here. So whatever the child is of body. So if I said body nth child 1, I could say background now. And if I, you know, yeah, okay. So background color gets like fuchsia thing. Let's say just hot pink. Is that a thing? No. Background color, and I have background spelled wrong. There we go. Background color, hot pink. Okay, we'll do that. And so now, you know, I can refresh the page, and, you know, it would say body and child. It should be like the outer div of everything. So, and you can see in here what gets ignored and inherited. So this idea of inheritance we'll talk about later. We'll have a whole like little discussion on inheritance and stuff like that. Okay. And then, yeah, so there's the eyedropper tool where you can go and look at things in your Chrome DevTools. So if I wanted to select and see what the tool is here, you know, I can go, I can basically look at, you know, extensions and things, but I can also like see the hex color and then like sort of play around with it. But there's so many cool things that you can do with the DevTools. So this project is just aimed at like letting you guys research the heck out of this topic, and like out of the DOM and out of HTML and CSS, and see what you can come up with as little hand-holding as possible. So try and get like as much of this site cloned as you can in the next 2 days, and then try and link up like JavaScript with it, and maybe, you know, like play around with some, you know, element selection and like, you know, HTML injection and stuff like that. So like injecting the inner HTML or appending or prepending a div or some sort of element in some way. All right. So this is supposed to be like less hand-holdy, even though you may feel like, oh, we've been less hand-holdy the last few weeks. But this is even going to be more so. This is more like, hey, let's take the next couple hours, research the crud out of this, and then see what we can come up with together as a partner. And so try and pair up with people. If you're inexperienced, try and pair up with people who are experienced and vice versa. I don't think there's anything more to go over. I mean, there's tons more to go over. Obviously, there's always tons to go over. But as in regards to what you need for this sprint, just go to github.com, RyanHCA. Oh, no, it's actually under Ben's name. So let's take a look at where it's at. I'm really, really excited for you guys to get to do this. This is going to be so informative. As you're going to learn so much from this. So this is the sprint. There's a nice big. So when we'll be done with this sprint, we'll be finishing up in the next couple of days. So I'll give you an actual deadline, like when we're going to stop finishing this. So when you're going to submit a pull request. So there's the sprint. I'm going to stop recording because it's total ramble time right now.